Okay, well, welcome everybody. It is 2022. I'm saying that right. It's not 2021. It's 2022. I don't want to say 2023. It's 2022. My name is Mike Tresca. I am here as your committee chair for the CAR-PGA. I'm very excited that we are here and continuing the streak that we concluded in December with having guests and ensuring that we continue our outreach both to the community and have some wonderful guests and learn wonderful things about what they're doing. But before we get to that, because it is the new year, I want to just give a couple of updates. First, as we do all the time, I wanted to welcome our newest members. It is not a coincidence that one of our newest members is also our guest. So welcome to Jim Wampler, who just joined, and we're going to talk to him in a minute, and Timothy Bannock as well. So we got two more members, which we're super excited about. If I'm fast enough, I may be able to put you into the annual report, which is a good segue. We are going to produce an annual report. Our goal is to be harsh but fair on how we did last year against our goals, which I think we did. The good news, it's a spoiler, but I think we did pretty good. There are some things we didn't achieve, but these kinds of video broadcasts and recordings that we do have definitely created some results that I think are positive. So we will talk about all that, but that is not without criticism. There is certainly criticism we're going to produce in the publication as well, and where we can do better, and looking ahead to 2022. Additionally, we are coming up on voting. So this is important. I think this is something we've sort of unfortunately not emphasized enough in the past couple of years, partially because the membership wasn't as robust as it is now, and we didn't have this kind of vehicle of communication to talk about it. So we're going to do that for sure. And what that means is it's really important everybody votes who's a member. We will talk. I think we haven't even met as a board yet. We're going to have our meeting hopefully soon. We're trying to schedule it. So we will have our board meeting. We will come to a conclusion on how we're going to do voting, but it is critical that everyone has their voice heard, both for board membership as well as committee membership. Not because, in terms of who votes in, that's not our concern as much as making sure the membership's engaged, right? No survey results is a bad sign. So for me, passionate, even if we agree or disagree, is really important. So we want to make sure we emphasize that the vote's coming up, and it's really important you vote. So definitely going to have an annual report that'll give you a chance to look back on sort of what we achieved. And then soon after that, we're going to be looking at voting. And all this will be in, I think, I don't remember how much of it I mentioned in the upcoming letter, but we will mention it for sure. If not, the next one into February, we will do that as well. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Jim. Jim, am I saying your name? Is it Wampler? Is that my Eastern accent? Am I saying that right?
I answered everything. It's Wampler, like
Wampler. See, it's a good thing
Wampler.
Stopped embarrassing myself further than, okay, so Wampler, not Wampler. Thank you for being so kind. I'm going to put you on the screen there. There you are. Now you're nowhere to hide. And Jim, we're super excited to have you. Thank you for agreeing to join. I think we talked about this last year, actually, right? And got you scheduled.
Well, technically, yes, 2 months ago was last year. So
yeah, I like to say that. Yeah, I'd say, oh, I haven't done that since last year. The dad jokes get old after a while, but that's okay. My kids, I can tell you, they never get tired of it. They never get tired of my dad jokes. At least that's what I tell myself.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, and I'm also happy to lower the bar for all future guests.
I don't believe that, but let's find out. There's one way to find out. So super excited. Obviously, we've been Facebook friends for a little bit. But usually the way we start these conversations, just to loosen this up and sort of understand where we are and where we're going, is sort of besides breathing exercises, which are good to do, sort of your gaming background. If you can, I'm sure it's a long, rich history, but if you could talk about sort of how you got into it, that would be a great start.
Not as much as you think, but yeah, I grew up in a small rural Kentucky town that D&D hadn't penetrated to when I was a teenager in the 70s. So in college at 79 as a freshman, I was introduced to it by a bunch of upperclassmen who were at that time playing with just like a mixed pile of books. The AD&D books that started coming out, they still had their little brown books, a bunch of other things like Arduin I didn't know about, stacks of Dragon magazines, and they got me going. And the thing I'm proud of is I immediately Christmas '79 gave the Holmes Basic set to my little brother, who was still back in our high school, and that was part of how D&D got to Frankfort, Kentucky in 1979.
Wow.
So from there, I was just a crazy teenager, so I piddled around and sent some cartoon art and some articles to and got them published in Pegasus magazine under Bob Bloodside Senior at Judges Guild. And when Tim Kask moved down to Cincinnati to start Adventure Gaming magazine at the old Wrapup, a writer buddy and I just haunted his existence pitching our stuff. And the funny thing is, when Tim and I became friends again much later, he doesn't even remember us from those days. And I guarantee you, you know, I was like 19 or 20 and my partner was a couple of years older. We were just, you know, we would drive 100 miles up to Cincinnati from Kentucky and just show up and here's our stuff and please print it. And, you know, God help him, he took something. Then we wanted to get paid too.
Right.
And all Tim remembers from those days is he remembers who the little redheaded punk with glasses was that knocked him out of the Ace of Aces tournament at CitsyCon '82. He remembers that.
That's fantastic.
That's how I got started, and I was all in. We were part of that group of Holmes Basic people. I think the Player's Handbook's the first book I ever personally bought. The minis, the whole thing, evangelizing D&D to anybody who would sit still and listen. And because of the age I was when we started, we had girls in our group because we were college age. And it wasn't so like generation 1.75, not really 2, not really 1. And then I went off and did a bunch of life stuff, you know, flunked out of college a few times, was a food service manager, went back to college, got a degree in painting, and gamed intermittently all along, but I didn't get back in as a writer and an artist and a publisher until about 12 years ago. I decided I wanted to get back in. My brother and I had had a tech startup that had taken a turn and dumped us on the sidewalk, and Marvin the Mage, this comic strip I created when I was 18, was how I was going to get back into gaming as a publisher, as a creator, and just started up as a web comic. And here we are 12 years later, and I've got an actual resume now.
So you're kind of a triple threat, right? I mean, certainly as an artist, as a writer, and as a publisher, as you mentioned. Which one do you consider yourself to be first and foremost?
Primarily an artist, and not even a, you know, that great a one, because my fine art is all abstract expressionist paintings and sculptures. Nothing anybody listening to this would be the least interested in, and some cartoon art. So artist first, visual thinker definitely. And I was in college for real when I discovered I could write. Prior to that, I'd always had writing partners. There was a Marvin the Mage pitch that went to Dragon magazine when Roger Moore was editing it, and he rejected it out of hand. And looking back on it, rightfully so, because that sounds self-aggrandizing because I didn't write it. Well, you know, the writer wasn't as funny as I turned out to be later. But when I got back into school, I got thrown into the student newspaper first as a cartoonist, and 3 years later, I'm editor-in-chief running the place. And that's when I discovered, oh, I can write too. I didn't grow up the greatest, so it took me being an adult a while to understand I can do a lot of things.
That's fantastic. And
Well,
to your
personal,
point, yeah, no, I think that, no, I'm not saying it's fantastic because of the background you're saying. I'm saying it's fantastic because you found your passion, your calling. I think one of the things that's, you made a comment there about being visual, right? And I always find that interesting where people come at gaming and imaginative careers. My brother's that way. He's visual first, right? And he's one of those, he's like, he teaches himself programming, and I can't even keep up with him. But the visual, sort of the ability to visualize, I think, is a huge skill in a creative field, especially role-playing games. So I can imagine it's a huge asset. It seems like it would be to me.
It'll inform who you are as a gamer, because I have a younger brother by 2 years that anything with tanks and dice and strategy and linear thinking, he can cream me at. But so that's why I ended up a role player. You know, beer and pretzel games I'm good at. You know, Axis and Allies, not so much.
Yeah, no, you and I are kindred spirits, I suspect, in that regard, which is I appreciate the math, but I cannot pull that off. Champions is challenge. I was the guy that people made characters for me. I'd be like, you know what I want? I want the character who can do this, and they're like, great. And they'd spend an hour and come back with the math done for me so I could play my character in Champions. And I was like, that's great, because I don't know how to do that. So I appreciate your approach. I think that's great. Now you mentioned Marvin and Mudpuppy Games. Sometimes I notice I think it's Mudpuppy Comics. I don't know if the URL or some of that. So did it evolve from a comic to gaming or both, or what was the sort of evolution there?
Well, the Mudpuppy brand is whatever I'm doing. So it's been Mudpuppy Comics, Mudpuppy Multimedia, Mudpuppy Games, whatever I'm doing. I just carry that with me. But the Marvin the Mage, I turned into a webcomic, ran it for 3 or 4 years to whatever popularity it had, but it was good enough to get me that with the kindness of Luke Gygax and Tim Kask Goodword got me invited as a special guest to my first Gary Con 10 years ago, however long it's been. And from there, I just determined, okay, I want to do this for real. I'm committed to it. And was just pitching anything to anybody that would listen. This all coincided with Goodman Games coming out with Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game, which I, having gotten back into gaming, I was shopping for a system anyway. And just going to the game store, meeting people that are now, my lifelong friends, going, what are you guys playing? And it was Pathfinder and Castles and Crusades, and then DCC hit. And for my play style and my play preference, it was in the sweet spot to the point that it was the first time since 79 I'd felt so enthused about a system that I wanted to go evangelize it. Well, my second system after D&D back in the day was Gamma World. We all would take ownership and GM one or the other system. Like my brother was our DM, but I ran Gamma World, and I just imprinted on that early. So when DCC came out, I immediately saw the possibility of, let's just write a big Valentine to Gamma World and DCC and see how it turns out. And it turned out. So
it's fantastic.
That got me started with Goodman Games there for a while.
Right. Yeah. And I wrote the Complete Guide to Werewolves for Joe. I love Goodman Games, and it's one of the stalwarts too. Like there's been a lot of companies that have come and gone through change, and because I think Joe runs a tight ship. Goodman Games has been.
I owe Joe a lot because I didn't just work for him. I also watched him. He's a very a smart guy and a canny marketer. And I picked up every trick I could pick up from him, and wrote a lot of stuff for him besides MCC, some DCC adventures. Every time there'd be a Metamorphosis Alpha project, I'd horn my way in, or any big book Kickstarter that needed an article so I could get an author copy. I'm not proud. Yeah. I'll do that.
Yeah, I think I wrote maybe 2 adventures. I think they were in collections of other stuff, but that's awesome. And it couldn't happen to nicer folks. And my son, when I got one of the things that was challenging for me to understand was that my son was not going to be a fantasy guy. He was not a D&D guy. He appreciates the game, but his heart is in post-apocalyptic Gamma World style stuff. And it was really nice. So, but it's funny because we, you're like, oh, he had knights in his room, and like slowly all those had to leave. And partially because that's the zeitgeist of like Minecraft and a bunch of other stuff. It's a little bit fantasy, but it's a little bit sci-fi, and it's sort of that kind of mutant kind of combination of games, and it lends itself very well to that setting. So for us, that's been our passion, really. Our shared passion was sort of that kind of setting. So the MCC, I think, really is in that sweet spot, and I think it's fantastic that you.
Not everybody's cup of tea. It's kind of like, who's your favorite Doctor Who? Well, it tends to be whichever one you imprinted on first. So. I mean, I imprinted on a Dungeon Master's Guide that had rules in the back for including post-apocalyptic, and 2 systems that were very close. So the genre mash was in my DNA early.
Yeah, and you've definitely carried the torch. To your point, I mean, I feel like it is the #1 way when you talk about sort of the Gamma World of today. That's it. So I think it's fantastic, and you've done it. And kudos to Joe in supporting it, but a fantastic job. So. That's one piece of what you do, right? So we touched on Marvin. So you're also a publisher. In that context, you're part of we talked about this earlier before we started with the union. So what do you, in addition to that, are you just publishing the pieces you're writing, or there's more to that, or how's that work?
I'm terrible at self-promotion in person. In writing, like marketing material, I can do it. But so my 3 big things are Mudpuppy Games, which is just my personal independent game publishing company where I get to do what I want. That's surprisingly freeing privilege to have. Then Save for Half podcast with my 3 other wonderful podcast mates, Mike and Liz Stewart and Corbett Kirkley, where we just talk about old school games and the modern games inspired by them. And that's just us having a lot of fun. And the only big deal about us is we just sound like your friends at the game store talking about games. And it's not even intentional. It's just we're all friends. We really like each other, and you know what I mean. Where you can just, oh, I love this game. No, I hate it, but it's all good natured fun.
Right. Yes.
And the Independent Publishers Union, which is brand new this past year. It's just 4 or 5 of us that have gotten together, small indie publishers, because we're all friends anyway, specifically to rent dealer space booth at game conventions and hawk our wares together as a unit, which we didn't know was going to work. And 2 cons in, it's been spectacular. We're very happy with it. That's Mudpuppy Games, Northwind Adventures with Jeffrey Tulanian, Skeeter Green Productions with Skeeter, Planet X Games with Levi Combs, Silver Belay with Ian McGarty and Rocky Gardner. Oh my God, did I leave anybody out? I don't think so.
That's great.
And
That's excellent.
And I was laughing with you that we unfortunately named it the Independent Publishers Union right before Paizo Workers Organized. Everybody had union on the brain. So we're not a real union, and we're not even a real organization. It's just 5 of us that have gathered together to cooperatively, rising tide raises all ships kind of thing. Sell our crap at cons.
It is technically a definition of union. It's a group of people getting together. I think that's
like
fair.
an e-pluribus, but not a workers local 160.
So talk about the podcast. So how did that come about?
It started in a different form. Mike and Liz and Vince Florio and Glenn Hallstrom and some other guys had a podcast called Save or Die. And Mike and Liz gradually took that over. This is a caution to you. They invited me to be a guest one time, and then they couldn't get rid of me. I became a co-host. So watch out. But
like a virus, that's great.
And that rolled along for a few years, and then I'm not dissing anybody who does this or still does this, but we just got tired of only talking about D&D. I think our rule then was it had to come in a box. We wanted to expand, so we just moved over and renamed things and do our own podcast where we just talk about any old, I never heard of it or read it until Corbett brings it up game. And then sometimes some things people under 50 would know.
Right.
Or new games that are based on some old mechanic.
That's fantastic. So how long
and just
has that
have
been
fun,
going for?
which is the only reason to do it. Nobody's making money.
If you can't have fun, why do it? So how long has that been going for? How long has it been? Looks like you got quite a few episodes.
I don't know. All together 10 years, and some piece of that forward is safer half.
That's fantastic. That's great. So, running a podcast too, obviously we were talking a little bit about sort of dealing with the public and sort of the new world. We're talking about, branding and engaging, right? So what are you seeing in terms of what's changed in the past 5 years? I mean, the pandemic alone probably is an asterisk you put on everything that changes everything. But what are you seeing in terms of gaming, both from a nostalgia perspective and going forward perspective? What's changed for you and for Mudpuppy Games?
I mean, we live in an embarrassment of riches. I know people love to argue about every little thing, especially on social media. But the truth is, one of the good things about being older is you appreciate it, because I remember when it was like a 100-mile drive to Cincinnati to hit the game store, and buy anything, have a chance. It was sitting there on the shelf. Now we got online shopping, still have great brick and mortar stores. There's a game for any taste you could possibly have. Sometimes people come at me, they want Mutant Crawl Classics to be more like the Road Warrior. Well, there's already a game, and there'll be more. You can have whatever flavor of role-playing or fantasy or sci-fi you want. That's the part that impresses me about where we are today. The pandemic was very interesting because when it first hit, everybody didn't know if that was going to turn their business upside down or not. And even within the bubble of the game industry, it did get some people. I mean, there were some companies bigger than me, but not big, that depended on the convention circuit, for their yearly profit loss, and they got torched. We were extremely fortunate in that everybody stuck at home still wanted to game and spend money on it. You know, that was a blessing.
Yeah, I think it's the makers of Rust. Is it the Rust miniature game? They closed up shop recently. I think they made an announcement and they were like, we're done. And they cited a lot of supply chain issues too, being one of the things that just killed them. And I imagine some of these miniature miniature companies where they're really relying on this international sort of channel are being challenged. So speaking of miniatures, your miniatures were on the cover of John's book, right? That's
Oh my God!
How did that happen? How did that happen?
It won't be out for a while because our editing takes forever. But we just had John on the show, the last episode we recorded this weekend. Got through an entire episode so focused on John's book that all of us, including John, forgot to bring up the minis.
All right, this is our chance.
Yeah. So I'll do what I'm supposed to do now. It was just one of those things. I mean, a year and a half ago now, when the book was in the planning stages, I mean, manuscript I'm sure was done, but John approached me about it. I think I could sculpt him a couple of small miniatures of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and he specifically wanted them as they were in the 70s. And in my head, I'm screaming, oh no, I don't think I can do that. And then he said, this is what I'll pay you. And I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. Okay, yes, I can do that. And because I'm just a jumping feet first guy. So I did those and painted them up for the cover photo shoot. And between John's recommendation and MIT Press's kindness in the contract for those, I was allowed to keep the rights to the minis themselves. So now I sell them in white metal pewter. You can go get them at the mudpuppy.com website. Little tiny miniatures of Gary Gygax with a world or a scrying ball in one hand and a game book in the other, and Dave Arneson with a magic staff and his clipboard full of notes.
I love it. And they really, I mean, they make the cover. So obviously John knew what he was doing and he picked the right person. I thought that was fantastic that you did that. And to your point, it was great to see you could sell, because actually when I did my review, people were like, well, where can I get those? And we're like, you actually can buy them. So it was fantastic to see. That was great.
Well, you know John a little bit at least. So we're similar in the, you know, in my head, I'm thinking how incredibly lucky I am because this book is going to sell minis. And I think John was thinking the same thing. Oh, this will be a great way to do branding for the book and sell these minis. So
yeah. No, that's perfect. It's it is funny. I always wonder, like, you know, obviously I'm pretty scholarly inclined. I had written my own book but not with the resources that John has. And you know, I always want like, oh, is there people like me really interested in this stuff? And I think certainly that's changed over time in the past 5+ years. People are really, really interested in the history of the game, partially because we're losing some of it. And partially because I think people forget it.
Because, right,
go ahead.
Because he's out there getting documentation, historical citation, and contemporaneous interviews now before they vanish. And it's not just John. It's MIT Press has an entire line of those books and an entire line of authors writing. I think that section of the MIT Press books are called game studies, and that's what I'm talking about. We won. You know, we won the nerd wars. They're MIT is studying us in games now. So,
so to that point, I mean, this is part.
I'm sorry, a wheelchair dungeon is where you want to draw the line in the sand, but it's great for everybody.
Absolutely, and that's so funny because it took a while. We wanted John in to the CAR-PGA, obviously, because that's the, you know, these are scholars. But you know, it's not just scholarship. It's sort of advocacy. It's engagement with the community. So you said you had some experience before we started here with sort of outreach using gaming for that purpose. Can you speak to that at all in terms of how you use role-playing games to engage the community?
I don't know to what extent anybody will care, but yeah. I was sharing with you that I had briefly been a chemical dependency counselor at a drug rehab, and didn't take me long to figure out that buried in the cognitive behavioral training were role-playing modules.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, you know, my eyes lit up. And it's not like what you know, there wasn't a dungeon screen and dice and an adventure. Sure. It was a psychology exercise, but it was still role-playing, and I grafted into that. And forgive me.
Bless you.
We were talking earlier about what's the weirdest place you ever ran a game.
Yes.
About 3-4 years ago, some artists here in Cincinnati who had their own gallery over on the other side of town wanted to do an installation piece of a Stone Age table with tree stump chairs and leaves as an art installation. And because they were, this sounds self-aggrandizing, they happen to have backed and been fans of MCC, would I come and run a game there at the art installation on opening night as performance art.
Wow.
And they didn't know I had a degree in fine arts and had exhibited in galleries in my youth and all this stuff. And I couldn't have been more in for that stuff. Their setup was beautiful. I chose to run DCC, a little more traditional fantasy. And I knew I had them when one of the artist's mother, who was close to my age, was just wandering around the corner. We got her over the table, and an hour later, she won't go into the keep with everybody else unless she can bring her horse too. And I'm like, yep. I don't know what we were doing here, but we did it.
That is fantastic. That's a dream moment right there in terms of achieving gaming with all the trappings and
As art
the right
performance.
sound. Yeah, fantastic. That's amazing. Wow. And so that had to be intense, right? So I imagine, was it easy to do, or was it, because part of the problem, I think about, I was funny because I was talking to my wife today about, she's talking about doing a live, she's a professional podcaster. She's talking about doing live podcasting. I was like, I did a game show once at a con where I was like, look, it's a game show where it's quizzes and it's games, it's role-playing games. So I'll be good. And I was horrible. I could not focus in the moment because they just couldn't get it together. It was the audience and the lights and everything else. So I mean, like, how was it to do that with obviously this environment that is probably different from sitting at a normal table?
I'll just out myself because I don't really care. I grew up in not great circumstances and had a mortal fear of public speaking well into my adulthood. And, my brother and I do a tech startup. We're going to pitch VCs. There was a whole process of getting over that. But it would recur again in early, like my very first Gary Con, people are coming up asking me for my autograph. And in my head, I'm not anybody that has an autograph worth offering. And it was just, shorting out all the circuits in my brain until I realized that I'm a role player, damn it. And this is what I know how to do. So I'll just role play the guy they want to talk to.
Yes.
And started doing that at cons. And Tim and I joke about it because there's real Tim and there's con Tim. And if you've met con Tim only, you don't know real Tim yet.
Yeah, con Tim is very intimidating. I know.
And I have a version of that where at a convention, people get in trouble at conventions. I don't find it that hard. Just behave myself and be nice to people. Yeah,
you shouldn't be, but some folks have challenges, I guess, with that sometimes. But that's fantastic, I think. So. Look, I mean, I think with the miniatures out, you've got the union, so you got your buddies, you got a podcast. I mean, what's next for you? I feel like you're ready to take on the world. I mean, is there anything you can't do? You already did an art installation. What else? Do you want to do it in space? What comes next?
Well, I mean, I'm just, working on an eventual retirement and paying my bills like everybody else. Nobody's getting rich in this industry, but I've been shocked by how well the last 2 or 3 years have gone, and I just want to build on that. I'm unfortunately late right now for my first Kickstarter, the 4th issue of Scientific Barbarian magazine. I need to get that at the door. In the background, I'm working on a new game. It's a superhero game I've been trying to wrestle in the mud with for 2 or 3 years now. And what's got me obsessive about it is I've got a new game engine. It's not a straight D20 game engine. And if I can get that bear, rest to the ground and out the door, that would delight me, because I would love to, do a second game that people enjoy. But in the meantime, I'm just going to have fun. I mean, because that's the main point of the whole thing, is if I can pay bills and have fun. What does everybody think? Everybody thinks, I know what, I'll get into game publishing and that way I'll game all the time. Well, it doesn't actually work that way. But if you stay on it and come all the way around the track, it can.
And you have to, all your posts, you just seem to be having fun. Like, you, of all the people that I see in my social media feed, Jim is having the most time of his life in the gaming industry, and benefiting from both, right? Obviously, you're in it, but you're able to sort of, both with your connections and your resources, able to really enjoy it, especially making miniatures and dice and everything else, which I think is just fantastic. So I enjoy. I lived through you and seeing all these great things that you're
Well,
doing.
thank you, and you're being extraordinarily kind. I mean, to someone who's my age and has basically learned to make a living out of being an arrested adolescent. But
Well,
you got to go with your strengths, right?
we keep saying we won, so that comes with it. I think is part of that. You mentioned Kickstarter. What's your feelings on certainly within the Kickstarter space? I at least part of the time I work for NWorld, and I write as a column there. But one of the things, and we were mentioning Egg is who's a phenomenal, and he covers Kickstarters. Ian Publishing has actually been using Kickstarters primarily, actually, for a lot of resources, to the point because the marketing and branding is so valuable. And I've certainly seen, I back Kickstarters that have failed. We've had Mike Best, one of my buddies on here, one of my gaming buddies who did his own Kickstarter, his first one. Thank God it was successful. I'm glad. But what's been your experience with Kickstarter, and sort of where do you think you're going with that?
I mean, it's a fantastic tool as long as you understand what it's for, which is both a funding means and a marketing tool, and used for those two things, with prudent and practical precautions. It's fantastic. It's a little easy for the unwary to get lost in the weeds with. But there's nothing wrong with the tool itself. It's just how it's used. And it's just like saying the desert's dry and the ocean's wet. I understand that there's no, like, if you want to invest in stocks, you have to make this amount of money, Sarbanes-Oxley law or whatever. And we don't have that in Kickstarter. So caveat emptor, buyer beware. You should do your due diligence before you pledge into a Kickstarter. But that's not always practical. I mean, I've been gotten, Ken Whitman and the Knights at Dinner Table live action series comes to mind, and me personally, I just brush it off and forget the money and go about my business and my day, because I've got other stuff to do. But some people can't do that. Some people very, very can't brush it off or put in more than they should have, and just be cautious. And I was very, very proud of doing 5 or 6 in a row and never being late, and now I'm late. So it's a thing. If you do something long enough and hang around long enough, eventually you'll sit at every seat at the table. So
that's right, including the one that's the one that has the kick me sign on it, unfortunately, some days too, right? So you have to deal with the positives and the negatives. Certainly Kickstarter,
I mean, I know what to do, which is
right.
Be straight with my backers, let them know there's a delay, keep them updated, at least update them every few weeks, and then do your best and learn from it and do better next time. Learn why that happened and don't do it again.
Yes, the one Kickstarter I was involved in, I didn't run it. Took us 8 years to complete. So I'm right there with you. And I think it was 8, may have been 5, but we because I knew that I could not, in any good faith, launch another Kickstarter with my name on it if we didn't close out the one that we were working on. By hell or high water, we got it done. So I totally am there with you. And a lot of times delays are outside of their supply chain issues, their individuals who contribute issues. There's lots of those things. At the company we were working with, closed shop and then handed it off to another company. I mean, the stuff like that happens, and so a lot of those things were out of our control. But it doesn't, to the backers, they don't necessarily care. So I totally experienced that. So you're doing Scientific Barbarian, which is sort of a zine, right? Is that right?
I call it a magazine just because it's about the size of a 6x9 trade digest size paperback. It's not really what you think of as the old punk rock stapled together thing. Yeah. So Mudpuppy's doing the Scientific Barbarian magazine, which is just my way of continuing to support Mutant Crawl Classics from over here in the indie publisher Bleacher Seats. And gives me great joy, and has had a surprisingly fantastic reception. So great. You know how it goes. You do a first issue and see how it goes. You don't know. And then branch out into some of the more fun stuff like the glow in the dark dice and D2 death die.
The death coin.
Kind of a just kind of a zinc challenge coin. You know, I have crazy ideas. I wake up with them every morning. Sometimes they get all the way through the process and come out the other end. No one talks me out of them. I have consiglieraries that regularly talk me out of some of the crazier trees, but no one
I'm
talks
just
me
going
out
to
of
call
that.
it Jim Unleashed. He can do it. He's running wild and nobody stops him. But I think that's great. I mean, obviously, that's the freedom that it brings to you. That's my favorite quote from, I think it was Steve Jackson in his annual report to shareholders. Like, I launched a game, and if I can't run a company and launch a game because I feel like it, not because it's a smart idea, then what am I doing? You know, and I was totally right there with him. You know, it's
Well, there's two sides to that, and I've been in both those seats, so I get it. But I'll speak straight for a second if I can. I mean, everybody sits in their seat and thinks they can do better than the guy up there. Like, I was a partner in and a part of numerous Kickstarters, including the one for Mutant Crawl Classics that did 6 figures. So in my head, Dunning-Kruger thing, I'm like, well, I know how to do this. It's great. But now it's me and it's all me and it's my show and I'm jumping in. And there was an enormous learning curve there that I didn't fully appreciate till I was in it. And that, I don't know, some people are just like me. You got to go learn the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's no substitute for experience for sure. Certainly, my experience learning, just, running my own writing / publishing and meager, whatever that is, has been hugely educational. So it is one of those things that, you don't want to warn people off of doing it, but they certainly have to have the stomach for it too. And learnings come with taking your knocks for sure. So I think that's hard earned.
Brother and I had an old tech startup mentor who used to just watch us go bang our head on a brick wall 52 times in a row before we got tired of it and just decided to step around the wall. And he'd just look at us and go, well, you just wrote yourselves a tuition check. The only crime now is not learning the lesson you just paid for.
Yeah, that's right. That's fantastic. Well done. That one, and I imagine you coming from the startup world, do you see some similarities with that and sort of the Kickstarter kind of, were there lessons you carried over, or is it just, because obviously venture capital, you're trying to get different funding?
Not as many as I would have liked to carry it over. It was more like, a moment later, oh wait, this is the same thing as. But yeah, sure. I mean, basic business stuff. I mean, I'm a creator. You're a creator. You might be a creator. It's a whole different thing when you're trying to do a business, because now you've got to start wearing multiple hats and be very conscious which hat is on and when. There's a time to have the creative hat on. There's a time to have the editorial publisher hat on. There's the time to I have to pay the bills next month hat on.
Right.
And that's in my, I mean, that was a learning curve for me, and in my experience, it's not the easiest thing for creatives to learn. It's much easier to teach a creative business chops than it is the businessman creative chops. So we've got that going for us.
100%. One of the things that I ended up running a video studio for GE Corporate when I was at corporate. And one of the things I learned very quickly was the bridge between the sort of business world and the creative world was rare. But boy, if you could get it right, it was magic. But there were very few people who could navigate those two worlds. And increasingly, that's not limited to that world anymore. It's really because, publishers are, to your point, you need business skills to do a lot of these things, and they're hard earned, but they're really valuable. It's one of the things we've been talking about, sort of what does an individual creator look like, right? We've got these Instagram followers, and my son, I don't think he wants to do it anymore after he's watched sort of the challenges my wife deals with her podcast, but they all want to be YouTube stars, a lot of the kids, and so I went through and did the math on what a lot of that takes. If you want to just support yourself from Patreon, if you want to support yourself from Kickstarter only, that's it. That's all you do. And we used the 1,000 fan theory, right? Which was $100 a year from 1,000 fans. You make $100,000 a year. They got to be super fans, though. They can't be casual fans, which of course means you got to get more to get to the super fan. And boy, is it daunting to see the challenges. But what it comes down to is everybody's got to be a marketer. Everybody's got to be creative, but we've all got the creative part. That's how we started. It's all the other stuff. And that's, I think, daunting and surprising for a lot of folks who maybe it used to be you either work for somebody and they did it, or they didn't appreciate how much marketing. I mean, you mentioned you do marketing. I imagine it's a huge part of your job, right?
Yeah. I mean, if I concentrate, I can give you the keys to success to any young person. I mean, there's no getting around the 10,000 hours in an individual field. You've just that bolus of work is how you get the expertise to have something worth selling, and there's no way around it. I'm sorry, it's sad, but but if you enjoy what you do, it's also thrilling and fun. Always have a couple of advisors that you've empowered to talk you out of those trees and given ball bats to or whatever to bonk you when you need it. Trusted, vetted opinions, and it's really great if some of those people are people that have successfully done what you want to try to do. It's enormously profitable to study the people that are already doing what you want to do and study what they do. I think I made that sound as boring as humanly possible, but
I think that was
good advice.
priceless. That's priceless, and we got it on video. So thank you for sharing that. That was fantastic. I think everyone needs to hear that because, to your point, there's a lot of people, and a lot of them are doing it. I mean, I always say, the good bad news of the internet is, guess what? It flattened the internet. That's the good news. The bad news is it flattened the internet. Everyone can do it, but not everybody can or should or knows how to. And to your point, finding people who with experience, of which there are many now, battle hardened for sure, I think is critical. David, I saw you. Did you unmute? Did you have something?
Well, I was just thinking loudly. Perhaps we should have a mini clips from our videos, a series of pithy short pieces, and that Jim's just stated insights could be one of those.
I love that.
And just like, there it is.
I love it. And then we'll end with Steve going, "We won. Stop talking." What else do you want? I love it. That's great. Yeah. So Jim,
I'm just sharing my experience. I mean, I'm not saying I'm right about everything.
No, and I mean, no, I don't know anybody's right or wrong, but experience is probably the rightest thing you can be, right? Is being experienced. And you, Jim, have done so many things. I mean, you're sort of my hero. I'd love to, I'm not saying you are my hero in terms of your ability to be fearless and sort of engage with I mean, I don't know what you're not doing. As I said, poetry, I'm not sure what else is left. You probably do poetry. You do poetry, don't you?
When I was younger man and in love, sure.
Yeah, see, exactly. I knew you probably did it all. So you mentioned sort of what's next. Obviously, some of these things are you're trying to get some of these things off the ground or completed, right? Because I think that's all of us. Were you affected by supply chain challenges? Has that come your way?
Not yet, but I am anticipating it. The current Kickstarter has 2 books. I mean, I still remember dumb things. I got overambitious. So I did a Kickstarter that was the 4th issue and a hardback Smithsonian annual of the prior 4 issues. And, I got a bid. I put it out for bids, did everything you're supposed to do back in September, August. Now I've got to, a few weeks from now, go back to the same printer and hope they've got paper. So that can screw me, because the paper comes from somewhere.
Right. Yeah. And one of the conversations we had with Steve, if you watch that video, was sort of, will we get onshoring back, and will it be in a way that helps tabletop gaming? Right. So, big board game folks, he was saying the key is really, frankly, cardboard. But I think in the tabletop space, where it's, some of it's a book industry, right? So it's sort of, how do we get those really critical pieces, and paper being one of them. So absolutely.
But it's okay, is it worse now? Sure. But some of that always happens. I mean, your book's in China and it's made it all the way to San Diego port and can't get past the port. Well, I mean, that's a problem as old as time.
Right.
I did a Kickstarter for glow in the dark dice. I did everything you're supposed to do. Had my sources in Shenzhou, vetted, bidded. I've got the bid. Now here's a great Kickstarter. Now it's time to deliver the dice. Oh, whoops, we ran out of 3 colors, and to cast another round, we're going to need you to get, and then they named like 5 times the number of dice I was signed up to buy.
Holy
and
cow.
I was, staring down the barrel of, okay, I've got to refund all my backers now, and instead just got mad dog mean and scoured every warehouse in Hong Kong until I found enough dice to fill the order.
Wow. Yeah. So again, voice of experience in navigating some of these things that aren't, again, they're not up to you.
That was a nice story because it worked out. Then sometimes it doesn't work out and there's nothing you can do about it except admit to it and make amends.
I appreciate that. And again, that's words of wisdom. David, do you have any other questions? Because then we'll start towards our wrap up, but I didn't know if you had something for Jim.
No, I don't have any particular questions, but I've really enjoyed hearing the tales of your adventures and the breadth of your experience. I do think it's invaluable and inspiring to many, many people.
I knew getting old was worth something.
Hard-earned, as I said, hard-earned experience, especially in the tabletop industry. So what's next short term, like what conventions and what's next for you in 2022?
You know, as long as the world doesn't blow up, me and my independent publisher union associates will be at TotalCon in February in Worcester, Massachusetts. And then GaryCon is next for me and most of us. Again, fingers crossed, you know, curves and mandates and things don't screw us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How has it been going to
I can't
conventions?
wait for, I mean, I don't mean to single out GaryCon because I adore TotalCon too, but it's been 2 years and I just can't wait to get back at.
You don't mean to single out GaryCon as you wear the GaryCon, you know, you're wearing the shirt, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
just to be clear.
Take that glass of water too.
Yeah. So you seem like a man who likes GaryCon. I'm just using my instincts here based on what I'm seeing. That's funny. What's your been experience with cons? Is it going to them? Have they been different?
I've only been to one since all this pandemic stuff hit, and it was TotalCon, and it was fantastic because fortunately at the time, last November, Wisconsin had a mask mandate. So Alex Kammer just followed suit. He always runs that convention like a Swiss watch anyway. But you know, you haven't been to it in 2 years and now there's mask mandates and everybody has to prove they're vaccinated to come in. I bet there'll be some cowboys, there'll be some disgruntled bees, and there was none of that. There was pure joy of people happy to reunite. And you know, 5 minutes of first game, we figured out we could run a game and be heard through the masks, and everything was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, I'm so happy.
I'm hoping TotalCon and GaryCon, you know, it won't be them. They're doing everything you can do. I'm just hoping events conspire to allow the same thing to happen at those two conventions.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and to your point, it's sort of a little bit of a learning curve for everybody, and you don't know it until you're there doing it. So that's great to hear, though. That's been our hope. As we've been talking about conventions, one of my goals that I published, I put it out there, so I guess I got to try and do it, was to start going back to at least some small conventions locally. But you know, we got to get through our current curve here before we even start considering that. And we were hoping, I was laughing because I was reading one of the magazines I read, news magazines, and I found an old issue and I hadn't gotten to it. So it's from June of last year, and it was like, oh, this will all be done by the end of the summer, last summer. And obviously that's not the case yet. So hopefully we can get there soon in the coming months. And certainly it affects conventions, it affects people playing in person, it affects all that stuff.
Well, the need for us to gather as our various tribes and just unite and game, that's of course important. But then for the people I have the empathy for are the owners and runners of these conventions, because when one of these things happens and, you know, they've already paid all the hotel deposits and stuff and it gets nuked and has to go virtual, it's great. I've seen some fantastic examples, including Luke Gygax and GaryCon of backpedaling to the virtual thing and surviving. But I know too much business to know that can't be easy. The money just doesn't magically appear, and you've always got to make enough profit to put on next year's convention. So it's been rough and tough on those guys. Yeah,
one of the most stressful parts of my job when I worked as a communicator for internal communications for an executive was event coordination. And to your point, you know, those hotels lock you in years in advance, not just a year, but years in advance, and they want the money up front. And so there's a lot of trying to turn that ship when you have something unexpected is quite challenging. And usually there's penalties because they know what happens, and then they want their money anyway, because that's money they could have given to somebody else. So it's really challenging. And hopefully the pandemic, because it affected everybody, was a little bit more forgiving. But do not envy anybody running a convention of any significant size trying to pivot when things like that go south. So more power to all of them. I mean,
even without a pandemic, just in normal years, they're doing the God's work anyway. It's a thankless job. And I mean, you know, I was briefly, you know, for a few years on the GaryCon team, so I saw some of it from the outside, and there's the enormous amount of work and effort everybody puts in, from the lowliest volunteer up through the people that have to walk around with the whole convention in their head 24/7 and
Right.
listen to Facebook magpies. You know, I didn't get the room I wanted. Well, you know. Luke outed himself the other day. His military background in the Army was with logistics and supply, so he was already used to people not listening to him before he
for
decided
sure.
to start running GaryCon. He had some chops coming in.
Yeah, I would imagine that skill set definitely translates over. That's fantastic. I'm not surprised either that Luke runs a tight ship. That makes perfect sense to me. So what, we're wrapping up here. What is there any socials, websites that we can find you or follow you at that we want to make sure everybody hears?
I'm on Facebook. I practically live there. I mostly use it for what everybody else uses it for, but also as a marketing tool, the Mudpuppy Games website and the Safe Raft podcast website.
I love it.
Feel free to join us and write us emails and let us know what you think.
That's fantastic. And so Safer Half, is there a schedule in terms of when the next podcast comes out, or is it sort of ad hoc? Or
it's not supposed to be ad hoc. We aim for one episode a month.
Okay.
When it was a decade ago and we were all younger and didn't have anything else to do, we used to pump episodes out like no tomorrow. But we're good getting together about once a month now. But there's a big backlog that you can go listen to. Excellent.
That's fantastic. Well, anything else you want to share that we didn't cover?
I just want to thank you for having me here. This has been fantastic, and I appreciate the whole idea of a committee for the advancement of role-playing games. That's why I chose to join today. I'm behind that idea.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And you joined us, so you're a part of it now. So you're not going anywhere. We know where to find you. And of course, we're going to be talking to you and everyone else who's a member, and anyone else who's not a member, because this is on the internet, such as it is, going forward. So I really appreciate you taking time. Don't go anywhere. We're just going to stop the recording, but I really appreciate you joining. Thank you so much. We will, what we'll do for sure is put all the socials and website information in our newsletter as well. So everybody will, and we'll also put it in the YouTube description. So thanks again, Jim. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
All right.